His daughter chose the chubby waitress? The tutor whispered sharply. But why is there a handprint under your sleeve? The words hit like glass breaking inside the quiet playroom. My wine glass lay shattered on the marble floor beside the toy shelf. Red liquid spreading like a stain I couldn't explain fast enough. The receipt for today's service slipped from my apron pocket, soaked at the edges, and my wrist burned where fabric couldn't fully hide what had already turned violet under the skin. 3 hours earlier, I told myself this job would be simple. Serve, stay invisible, leave without being noticed. That was before the child ran toward me instead of the tutor. Before her small fingers locked around my sleeve like I was the only solid thing in a room full of strangers. Don't let her take me away, the girl whispered, her voice shaking so softly it almost disappeared into the hum of surveillance cameras in the ceiling. I froze, one hand still holding the tray of untouched juice glasses, feeling the weight of every camera lens above us like judgment without words. The tutor smiled when she entered the room, the kind of smile that belonged to people who never had to raise their voice to control others. She is forming unhealthy attachments, she said politely, eyes sliding over my body like I was a mistake in the architecture of this house. I lowered my gaze immediately, adjusting the cuff of my sleeve with practiced care. No one here was supposed to see what was under it. Not the guests, not the staff, definitely not the child. But the girl refused to let go of my hand. And that was the first time I felt something shift in the air of this mansion. Like silence itself had turned into pressure. I knelt slowly, careful not to startle her, and whispered that she should go back to her lesson. Instead, she pulled me closer. Her grip tightened at the exact place where my sleeve failed to hide the truth. Pain flared, sharp, immediate, undeniable. I didn't react. I had learned not to react. The tutor's voice sharpened. Release her hand. I did not move, not because I was defiant, but because the child was trembling now, and letting go felt more dangerous than staying. Still, that was when I saw him. From the doorway behind the glass partition, the Mafia boss stood completely still. No rush of footsteps. No interruption. Just observation. His daughter was holding on to me like I belonged there, and his eyes were not on the scene, but on my wrist. A pause. A fraction too long. The kind of silence that means calculation. I adjusted my sleeve again, slower this time, but the fabric slid just enough. A faint imprint. Fingers pressed too hard, too precise. Showed through like a secret refusing to stay buried. The tutor stepped closer, voice still calm. She must have injured herself elsewhere. I will document it. But I saw it then, the smallest change in the boss's expression. Not anger, not belief, something colder. Doubt that had already begun to look like intent. The child whispered again, softer this time, as if she already knew something the adults were pretending not to see. She didn't hurt me. She held me. And as the camera above us quietly rotated, I noticed something on the floor near the toy shelf that hadn't been there before. A small service recorder belonging to the tutor, still blinking red, still recording everything, including the moment my sleeve shifted and the truth began to surface. The notification light on the tutor's recorder was still blinking when I noticed the second sound. Soft, almost polite, like a camera shutter hiding inside the ceiling. The red wine had already stopped spreading across the marble floor, but the stain near the toy shelf looked darker now, thicker, as if the house itself was deciding what to remember. My wrist still burned under the sleeve, every pulse turning the hidden mark into something alive, something that refused to stay invisible. She is forming unhealthy attachments, the tutor repeated calmly, as if she were reading from a prepared report rather than standing in front of a child who was still gripping my hand like a lifeline. The Mafia boss didn't move. He didn't step forward, didn't interrupt, didn't even look at me directly at first. He was watching the way his daughter's fingers refused to let go. That was the first shift. 3 seconds of silence that felt heavier than any voice in the room. I slowly adjusted the tray I was still holding, setting the untouched juice glasses down on the edge of the toy table, careful not to let them clink. The sound still felt too loud. The tutor walked closer, heels soft on the carpet, eyes scanning me like she was trying to rewrite what had already been seen. "You can release her now," she said gently to the child. The girl shook her head. Once. Small. Absolute. I knelt slightly, just enough to lower myself to her level without breaking eye contact, and whispered that it was okay, that she didn't have to hold on so tight. But her grip tightened instead, right over the place where my sleeve could not fully cover the bruise. I felt the pressure flare again, sharp enough that my breath caught, but I did not pull away. Behind the glass partition, the Mafia boss finally shifted his gaze. Not to the tutor, not to the child, but to my apron. The service tag clipped to it was slightly crooked, still damp from earlier. His eyes lingered there for half a second too long, as if something about its position didn't match the room's timeline. I noticed the second anomaly at the same time. The tutor's tablet, left open on a nearby chair, displayed a shift log. My name was listed for this room starting at 3 p.m. But I had arrived at 2:40 p.m. I remembered because I had bought coffee downstairs, black, no sugar, and the receipt was still folded inside my pocket. Timestamp 2:43 p.m. That gap shouldn't exist. The kitchen door behind us swung open and closed as staff moved through, the sound of dishes clinking faintly mixing with the hum of the surveillance system overhead. Normal life continuing inside something that didn't feel normal anymore. I reached into my apron slowly, pulling out the receipt and flattening it against my palm. The ink was still sharp enough to read. The tutor's voice remained calm, almost soothing. She likely misremembered her arrival time. Stress can do that. I looked at the receipt again, then at the tablet. Two different truths sitting side by side without explanation. The child tugged my sleeve again, and this time I saw it clearly. Not just the bruise, but the exact outline beneath it, shaped like fingers that had held too long and too hard. I didn't say anything. I just let the moment exist without correction. The Mafia boss stepped one pace closer to the glass. Still silent, still watching. And then, very quietly, almost lost in the sound of the room breathing, the tutor's recorder on the floor emitted a soft click, like it had just saved something it shouldn't have been recording, right before the timestamp suddenly jumped backward by 42 seconds. The recorder on the floor clicked again, but this time the sound didn't come from playback. It came from a manual stop, like someone had just touched it from inside the system. The tutor didn't react. She only adjusted her posture, smoothing her blazer with two slow, practiced movements, the kind used when resetting control in a room that was starting to slip. The child was still holding my hand, but her grip had changed. Less panic now, more certainty, as if she had already decided I was not the danger in this room. The Mafia boss remained behind the glass partition, unmoving, but his attention had narrowed. Not on the child anymore. Not fully on me. On the space between details. The gaps. "She's overreacting," the tutor said gently, smiling in a way that never reached her eyes. "Children attach to whatever is nearest when they're confused." Her voice was polished, but I noticed something small. She avoided looking at my wrist when she said it. I slowly pulled the sleeve down again, but not before I saw his daughter glance at the exact same spot again, like she had memorized it. I reached into my apron and unfolded the coffee receipt a second time. The ink was still clear, 2:43 p.m. I pointed at it softly, not accusing, just stating. I was at the cafe before I arrived here. The tutor let out a light laugh, almost amused. Time confusion is common when you're juggling multiple jobs. It's understandable. She turned slightly toward the boss now, shifting the conversation away from me. We should focus on the child's emotional regulation rather than minor scheduling inconsistencies. But I noticed her hand, just for a second, slip to her tablet and lock the screen. That movement was too fast to be casual. The Mafia boss finally spoke, voice low enough that it didn't echo, only settled. "Open the log again." The tutor hesitated, a fraction too long, then complied. The shift record reappeared. My name, 3 p.m., clean entry. No edits visible. But I saw it now too. The metadata line at the bottom flickered for half a second before stabilizing, like something had been overwritten and then corrected. The child suddenly tugged my sleeve again, harder this time, and I felt the fabric shift just enough to expose the edge of the bruise. The tutor's gaze snapped down immediately. "Stop pulling at staff," she said quickly, too quickly, stepping closer to the child. Her tone remained gentle, but there was pressure underneath it now, control slipping into urgency. I knelt again, not to obey, but to steady the child's hands. That's when I noticed it, the smell on the tutor's sleeve. Not perfume, not coffee, something metallic clean, like disinfectant used in restricted areas. I had smelled it once before, in the service hallway outside the medical wing of the estate, a place I was never scheduled to enter. The Mafia boss shifted for the first time in several seconds. Not toward me, toward her sleeve. His eyes stayed there longer than necessary, then moved to the child's hands still wrapped around mine. "Where were you before this room?" he asked quietly. The tutor smiled again, but it was thinner now. "Reviewing her session notes. Everything is documented." I didn't move, but I remembered something she hadn't said. Her arrival time was not logged in the system at all. The coffee receipt in my hand suddenly felt heavier, like it was no longer just proof of where I had been, but proof of something missing elsewhere. The child leaned closer to me and whispered, almost soundless, "She told me not to tell you I cried earlier." The tutor froze for the first time. Not a performance freeze, a real one. And in that silence, I noticed the tablet screen she had locked earlier had a faint reflection of a second profile open underneath. One labeled, "Incident Review, Restricted Access." The silence broke only when the tutor's tablet screen lit up again, casting a cold blue reflection across her perfectly controlled smile. "We should continue the child's session," she said smoothly, as if nothing had shifted in the room at all. But her eyes did not return to the child. They returned to me briefly, like a warning wrapped in etiquette. The Mafia boss had moved closer now, still behind the glass partition, but no longer distant. He was listening in a way that made the air feel thinner, as if every word spoken in the room was being weighed before it was allowed to exist. The child stayed pressed against me, her small hand still locked around my wrist, and I could feel the exact point where the bruise beneath my sleeve pulsed under pressure. "She should be escorted out," one of the estate attendants said gently, stepping into the room with a practiced smile. "This environment is not appropriate for what?" I interrupted softly, before I could stop myself. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed anyway. The attendant blinked, surprised at the interruption, then smiled tighter. "For untrained interaction with the air." The word air hung in the air like a boundary line I had accidentally crossed. I slowly reached into my apron and placed the coffee receipt on the polished table beside the child's toys. It looked out of place there, paper against marble, ink against wealth. "I was scheduled at 3 p.m., I said calmly. "I arrived at 2:43. I have the receipt." The attendant didn't even look at it. "That doesn't change protocol." The tutor gave a small, sympathetic laugh. "She's clearly overwhelmed. It's understandable given her position." That word again. Position. Like I was furniture that had moved on its own. The child tugged my sleeve harder, and I adjusted my arm slightly to keep the fabric from slipping further, not to hide myself, but to keep her from seeing the bruise again. The Mafia boss finally spoke from behind the glass. Let her finish speaking. It wasn't a defense. It was an instruction. The room shifted. The attendant hesitated, then stepped back half a step. The tutor tilted her head slightly, recalculating. "Of course," she said gently, "but we should not allow emotional confusion to interfere with the child's training schedule." She turned to me again, voice still soft but now edged with precision. "Did someone instruct you to enter restricted caregiving space?" I shook my head once. "No, then why are you here?" she asked. A simple question, but it was structured like a trap. I felt the weight of every eye in the room tighten around me. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling camera adjusting its angle. I did not move away from the child. "Because she pulled me in," I said quietly. The child nodded immediately, as if confirming something obvious. The tutor's smile didn't break, but it shifted, just slightly off-center now. "Children often misinterpret comfort as necessity," she said, turning slightly toward the Mafia boss again. It's part of emotional dependency disorder formation. That phrase was delivered too smoothly, too rehearsed. The Mafia boss's gaze moved, not to her face, but to her tablet again, where the incident review, restricted access file was still faintly visible beneath the locked screen reflection. Then something changed. A second staff member entered with a clipboard, paused, and quickly corrected their posture when they saw the scene. "There is a discrepancy," they said carefully. "The hallway camera near the service entrance shows her arrival at 2:41, not 3 o'clock. The tutor didn't turn immediately. When she did, her expression remained calm, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the tablet, just enough to flatten the skin. "Cameras malfunction sometimes," she said lightly, but the room had already stopped agreeing with her. And on the floor beside the toy shelf, the small recorder blinked once more, then suddenly displayed a new timestamp log that had not been there before, showing an entry marked manually labeled, "Correction initiated by admin override." The room had changed shape without anyone moving. It was still the same playroom. Soft carpet, polished shelves, cameras in the corners. But now every object felt like it was listening. The recorder on the floor blinked steadily, locked in its new timestamp, as if it had decided to stop pretending it was just another device. The tutor stood still for half a second too long after the staff member's correction, then exhaled a soft, controlled laugh. "System delays happen," she said gently, turning the moment into something technical instead of dangerous. "No need to confuse timing errors with intent." But her eyes flicked once, just once, to the door where the Mafia boss had now fully entered the room. No longer observing from glass, now inside the space. The child did not let go of my hand. If anything, her grip tightened when the atmosphere shifted, like she could feel which adults were safe and which ones were recalculating outcomes. I kept my sleeve pulled down, but my other hand slowly reached into my apron again. This time, I didn't pull out the coffee receipt. I pulled out something smaller, a folded security badge, worn at the edges, not meant to be in this room. I placed it carefully on the table beside the toys. "No announcement, just placement." The tutor's smile flickered for the first time. "That doesn't belong here," she said softly. "It was found in the service corridor," I replied. My voice stayed even, but my fingers stayed on it, not letting it slide away. The badge had a name printed on it, partially scratched, but still readable enough to matter. The Mafia boss's eyes dropped to it immediately. The room did not speak. Even the child went still, sensing the shift before understanding it. The attendant from earlier stepped forward. "That's likely misplaced. Staff sometimes—" "No," I interrupted quietly. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I finally looked at them instead of the floor. It was in the VIP hallway outside this room. That detail landed harder than anything else so far. The tutor moved first, reaching for the badge, but I placed my hand over it. Not aggressive, just final. Not allowing removal. The Mafia boss's gaze stayed fixed on the name. He didn't touch it. He didn't ask yet. But I saw it, the smallest fracture in his certainty. Like a thought he didn't want forming had already started anyway. The tutor recovered quickly. "Staff badges circulate constantly in shared corridors," she said. "This proves nothing except access." "Then explain the timing discrepancy," I said, still calm. "Because I was not in that corridor at the time listed on your system." Silence stretched again. The child shifted closer to me, resting her forehead against my arm. I felt her breathing slow slightly, like she had decided I was still the correct answer to a question no one had asked out loud yet. The Mafia boss finally picked up the badge, just between two fingers, careful, like weight mattered more than appearance. His eyes stayed on the scratched name longer than necessary. Then he spoke, not to me, not to the tutor, but to the attendant. "Who signed access for the service corridor at 2:40? The attendant hesitated. "That would be logged under—" The tutor cut in smoothly. "It would have been under routine maintenance protocol. I can verify it myself." Too fast. Too precise. I noticed it immediately, the way she answered before the system was consulted. The boss noticed it too. I could see it in the way his jaw didn't move for a full 3 seconds after she spoke. He set the badge back down, but not where it was. Slightly off-center. Like he didn't trust returning it to anything exact anymore. Then, from the recorder on the floor, a faint burst of audio played, accidentally triggered or not. A fragment of voice. Not mine. Not the child's. The tutor's, clear and unmistakable. Make sure that part of the footage is removed before review. The sound cut out immediately. But it was enough. The child looked up at me, then at him, as if waiting for someone to decide whether that sentence had ever existed at all. The Mafia boss did not look at the tutor anymore. He looked at the badge again. And this time, he did not blink for a long moment that felt too heavy to belong to silence alone. The badge was still on the table when the rain started tapping softly against the glass walls of the playroom. A slow, steady rhythm like a metronome for something breaking apart in silence. No one moved to pick it up. Not the tutor. Not the staff. Not even the attendant who now stood half a step too far back, as if proximity itself had become dangerous. The Mafia boss held it again, this time longer, rotating it slightly under the ceiling light. The scratched name didn't change, but the weight of it did. Something about it had stopped being administrative and started becoming personal. Check the service corridor logs for the last 2 weeks, he said quietly, not raising his voice, not looking at anyone in particular. The attendant hesitated. Sir, those are... Now. The word was not loud. It was final. I stayed where I was, still holding the child's hand. She had stopped shaking. That was the part one noticed most. The absence of fear now replaced with something steadier, like trust settling in where confusion used to be. The tutor exhaled slowly, stepping back half a fraction, adjusting her tablet again. You're allowing a misinterpretation of isolated data points to influence a structured behavioral program, she said carefully. That can compromise long-term. Show me the logs, he interrupted. Still calm, still controlled. But the room obeyed faster this time. Somewhere behind us, a server computer chimed softly as files were pulled up. The sound of distant kitchen machinery filtered through the walls. Metal trays, running water, a dishwasher cycle restarting after a pause. Life continuing like nothing had shifted, even as everything had. I noticed my receipt still folded in my apron. I didn't take it out again. It had already done its job. What mattered now was not where I had been, but where the system said I wasn't. The attendant returned with a tablet, hands slightly tighter than before. Here, they said, placing it carefully on the edge of the table without meeting anyone's eyes. The Mafia boss looked at it for a long time before touching it. On screen, corridor access logs. My name appeared once, then again, then a gap. Exactly 7 minutes unaccounted for between 2:47 and 2:54 p.m. The tutor moved immediately. System delay during sync, she said, voice still smooth, almost reassuring. That's a known issue in the older nodes. It happens during high traffic. I finally spoke again, quietly. I was serving in the West Wing during that time. Noak Yasaschin. Just correction. The child looked up at me as if confirming I was still speaking the truth she already understood without words. The Mafia boss did not look at me when he responded. Pull the West Wing CCTV. Another pause. Another command carried out too quickly. The screen refreshed. The footage loaded. But instead of continuous video, there was a blank segment. Exactly 7 minutes missing. The tutor's fingers stopped moving. For the first time, her posture shifted. Not fear, not panic, but recalculation. That's impossible, she said softly. The boss leaned slightly closer to the screen. Not emotionally, mechanically, like a man reading a report that contradicted a version of reality he had already accepted. I reached into my apron again, but this time I didn't pull out paper or proof. I pulled out something smaller, a second copy of the service log slip, one I had been given at check-in with my assigned route printed clearly. I placed it next to the tablet. My route never included the service corridor, I said. So I don't know why I'm in that log at all. The tutor let out a small, controlled breath, almost like laughter without humor. Human error in assignment mapping, she said. It's been happening since the last update. But she didn't look at the log anymore. She looked at the boss. And for the first time, she didn't seem fully certain what expression she was supposed to have. The child leaned into me again, quieter now, almost sleepy, like the tension in the room had finally given her permission to stop bracing herself. The Mafia boss didn't move for a long moment. Then he picked up the log slip. Not mine, not hers, but the system printout, and read it again, slower this time. His gaze stopped at one line that didn't match anything else in the room.
À supervisory override signature.
Not mine. Not the tutor's. Someone else's. Someone who had been trusted long before this room ever existed. And in that silence, he finally realized he had been watching the wrong person for a very long time. The silence in the room had changed texture. It was no longer empty. It was structured, like something had been rewritten while nobody was looking directly at it. The supervisory override signature on the log stayed frozen on the screen, refusing to move, as if even the system had decided not to explain itself further. The Mafia boss didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His attention stayed on that single line longer than anything else in the room, as if everything before it had become irrelevant noise. The tutor finally exhaled, softer now. That signature is internal administrative clearance, she said carefully. It's unrelated to caregiving activity. Her voice was still controlled, but I noticed the smallest fracture in it, the kind that appears when explanation stops feeling sufficient even to the person giving it. The child was still beside me, but now she wasn't clinging. She was watching, quiet, observing the adults the way children do when they start realizing not all certainty is honest. The Mafia boss turned slightly toward the attendant. Who holds supervisory access for this wing? The question was simple. Too simple. The attendant hesitated again, eyes flicking toward the tutor before answering. It rotates quarterly. Final approval is under estate governance. The boss nodded once. No emotion. Just processing. Then he said, bring me the governance list. No urgency. No anger. Just inevitability. The room obeyed. Somewhere beyond the glass, a drawer opened. A keyboard clicked. A file transfer icon appeared on a nearby monitor. The sound of data moving felt louder than conversation. I adjusted my sleeve again without thinking, but this time the bruise underneath no longer felt like the center of anything. It felt like a smaller piece of a larger pattern I was only now allowed to see. I looked down at the child and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. She leaned into it slightly, then whispered something only I could hear. She said you would leave if I liked you too much. My hand stopped mid-motion, not because of fear, because of repetition. The same kind of phrasing I had heard earlier. Controlled language, structured influence. The tutor stepped forward immediately, voice light again, almost corrective. Children reinterpret instructions emotionally. That's why structured guidance is necessary. The Mafia boss didn't look at her when he responded. Repeat what you just said. She blinked once. I said children. No, his voice stayed even. The part after that. A pause. The air tightened. The tutor smiled gently, but it didn't hold. It's not relevant to repeat it. Still no raise in volume. Still no aggression. But something in the room shifted anyway, because now even the attendant stopped moving. The tutor's gaze flickered once toward the door, then back. She was told emotional attachment could lead to staff removal, she said finally. It was part of behavioral stabilization protocol. I felt the child's grip tighten again, but this time not from fear, from recognition. Like she understood that something she had been told was not meant to protect her, but to control what she believed. The Mafia boss reached out slowly and picked up the governance list when it arrived. He didn't read it immediately. He placed it on the table first, aligning it precisely with the edge of the wood, like order itself mattered more than reaction. Then he spoke. Call the last person who approved supervisory override. The attendant froze. Sir, that would require executive authorization. A beat. The boss finally looked at them. Not sharply, not angrily, just fully. I am authorizing it. That was all it took. The call was initiated. The speaker on the table lit up with a soft ring. Once, twice. On the third ring, someone answered. A calm voice, familiar to the system. "You're reviewing an old incident file," the voice said smoothly before any question was asked. The tutor's posture straightened instantly, too quickly to hide recognition. I didn't know the voice yet, but I saw the reaction before I heard the answer. And in that moment, I realized the room was no longer investigating what happened. It was preparing to protect whoever had made it happen. The voice on the line was calm enough to sound rehearsed. "You're reviewing an old incident file," it repeated, as if that sentence alone could close the room back into obedience. But the Mafia boss didn't answer immediately. He looked instead at the speaker, then at the tutor, then at the governance list still aligned perfectly on the table. Every object in the room suddenly felt like it had a second version hidden underneath it. I held my breath without realizing it. The child didn't. She was watching the phone like she already understood which adults were pretending. "This matter was resolved internally," the voice continued. "No further action is required." A soft click echoed as if someone on the other end had already begun to disconnect. That's when I moved. Not forward, just slightly closer to the table. My hand went into my apron, not searching, but choosing. I pulled out the small recorder I had found earlier, the one that had been blinking, the one that had been overwritten, the one that had still saved what it was not supposed to keep. I placed it down beside the governance list. No explanation. No performance. Just truth in physical form. The tutor's expression changed first. Not fear. Calculation collapsing into urgency. "That device was flagged for corruption," she said quickly. "It's not admissible data. Play it," the Mafia boss said. The two words cut through her sentence without raising volume. The attendant hesitated. The child squeezed my hand once, then released it as if she knew this moment belonged to the adults now. The recorder clicked on. First static. Then a fragment of hallway audio filled the room. Clear enough to recognize voices, close enough to feel like it had happened inside the walls rather than through speakers. The tutor's voice came through first. Not calm, not polished. "If she remembers the corridor timing, adjust her assignment log. I don't want her appearing in that window." A pause. Then another voice, colder, administrative. "And the child?" The tutor answered without hesitation. "She will attach regardless. We just control the target of attachment." The room did not react immediately. It simply stopped breathing. The child looked up at me slowly, like she was learning what those words meant for the first time. I didn't look away from the speaker. I didn't need to. The Mafia boss had gone completely still. Not frozen in shock in the way people collapse. Something more dangerous. Stillness that comes after recognition. His hand moved once, slowly, toward the governance list, but stopped halfway, hovering above it like even touching it might change what it meant. The tutor finally spoke again, softer now, trying to repair the air. "That is taken out of context. Behavioral compliance requires structured." "Enough." His voice was quiet, not louder, just final. He picked up the recorder himself this time, as if confirming that sound had weight. He listened again. No one interrupted him, not even the room. When it ended, he set it down with care that felt almost wrong in its precision. Then he looked at her, not like an employee, not like a tutor, like a structure he had once trusted without inspection. "You signed off on my daughter's behavioral logs," he said slowly. The tutor nodded immediately. "Yes, for stability." He held the governance list up slightly. "And this signature?" A pause. The tutor's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, no answer arrived fast enough to sound natural. The attendant stepped back without being told. I felt the child move closer to me again, but this time not from fear, from alignment. Like she had already decided which silence was safe. The Mafia boss finally set the recorder down. Very gently. Then he reached for his phone again, unlocked it, and without looking away from the tutor said, "Call my attorney." The attorney's voice came through the speaker first, calm and precise, as if the room had already shifted from revelation into consequence. "We've secured the internal audit access," he said. "No one outside executive authorization will be able to alter or suppress what we retrieve next." The tutor didn't move. She didn't speak either. The silence around her was no longer controlled. It was collapsing into something thinner, something exposed. The Mafia boss stood near the table, still holding the governance list, but his attention was no longer on it. It was on her. Not anger, not performance, just recognition of structure breaking under its own weight. I stayed beside the child. She had stopped gripping my hand so tightly now. Instead, she was watching the adults like she was finally understanding that truth had weight, and it could fall. "Begin full access recovery," the attorney said. A soft series of clicks followed. Then the room monitor flickered. The corridor footage returned first, this time complete, unedited. Saw myself on the screen, walking through the service corridor exactly where the logs had said I wasn't supposed to be. But then the angle shifted slightly, and what I hadn't seen before appeared. The tutor's silhouette behind me, standing just out of direct view, speaking into a device while I was being rerouted on paper. The Mafia boss didn't interrupt the playback. He didn't need to. Every frame was already speaking for itself. The tutor finally exhaled. "This is being misinterpreted," she said, but the softness in her voice had disappeared. "Operational adjustments during behavioral scheduling are standard practice." I looked at her then, not accusing, just steady. "You said I wasn't in the corridor," I said quietly. "But I was in the corridor." The child turned her head slightly toward her, then back to me, as if confirming which version of reality still held her safely. The attorney's voice returned. "There is also an archived financial routing log tied to the same time window." Another file opened on the screen. Bank-level records, transfer approvals, authorization stamps. The tutor's name appeared again, but this time not for scheduling, for funding. I saw the Mafia boss's hand still, not shaking, not reacting, just still as the implication settled into something heavier than surprise. The tutor finally stepped back. One step, then another. "These are internal compliance reallocations," she said quickly. "They are not related to caregiver interaction." But no one in the room followed her explanation anymore. The attorney continued. "The same account approved access modifications for restricted caregiving logs across 3 separate incidents involving the child." That was the first time the Mafia boss looked at the tutor without interpretation. Just direct sight. "No mudiaschen. No instituschen el filter." I felt the child lean closer to me again, but now it wasn't fear. It was grounding, like she had found the place she was supposed to stay standing. The tutor's voice sharpened slightly. "You are escalating administrative adjustments into personal judgment." The Mafia boss finally spoke. Quiet, controlled, final. "Step away from her. Not me. The system. The authority. The structure she had been standing inside." The tutor hesitated, just for a fraction. That hesitation was enough. The attorney's voice softened slightly. "All prior supervisory privileges have been suspended pending full review." The tablet on the table chimed once. A notification appeared. "Access revoked." The tutor looked at it, then at him, and for the first time she didn't have a response ready. The child reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the folded coffee receipt I had kept there since the beginning. She placed it on the table between the governance list and the recorder, aligning it carefully, like she understood its importance even if she didn't understand why. The Mafia boss looked down at it, at the timestamp, at the normalness of it. Then he looked at me, not as staff, not as a variable in a system, but as someone who had been standing in a place no one had been measuring correctly. And in the quiet that followed, he didn't speak again. He simply reached out, adjusted the child's hand back into mine, and let the room remain exactly as it was, now that nothing inside it could pretend anymore.